Thanks a lot, Jorgen. I'm going to attempt to do a screen share here. Okay, did that pop up on your end, Jorgen?
Yep, looks good.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you, Jorgen, for the introduction, and thanks to PFI for inviting me to be a part of this virtual event this year. I was, like most people, hoping that this would be an in-person something, but I think this is a pretty neat plan B that's available. So, and then thank you to everyone that is joining us today. So what we're going to cover here today, I'm going to talk a little bit about Pheasants Forever, a little bit about the opportunities that we see within the precision agricultural space for wildlife, and then I'm going to actually talk through my process or our process with an actual example of a customer that I've worked with. So I think, as Jorgen said, if you guys have questions, put them in the chat box and we'll tackle those at the end. So Jorgen actually stole a little bit of my my thunder here with this on what Pheasants Forever is. In my day job as a precision ag and conservation specialist, as I meet new customers, as I meet new partner organizations that we're going to do some work with, and I tell them that I work for Pheasants Forever, I always get, not always, I occasionally get a little bit of a strange look there about that correlation. So, and that's a result of a lot of people thinking of pheasants, hearing Pheasants Forever, and thinking of an annual banquet where there's prime rib and raffle tickets, and that's, I'm going to say that's a compliment to our large network of chapters, Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever chapters across the country. So that kind of reputation precedes us. However, that isn't what we do. Those fundraising banquets are a means to an end. Those are a fundraising exercise or part of our fundraising program to help raise money for habitat. Habitat is what our mission is. Our mission statement is down there in the bottom left. You guys can go ahead and read that. But we're known as the Habitat Organization, and that is what we look to deliver. Pheasants Forever was established in 1982 as a nonprofit conservation organization, just looking to improve and increase the amount of habitat on the landscape. And that was done through local grassroots chapters. And we're 750 chapters strong today. And that's really the foundation of our organization. And how we've delivered habitat, how the chapters have delivered habitat since 1982 has been through working with private landowners on habitat projects. So that's a picture in the top left of our very first habitat project. I believe it was a shelter belt planting. And then the lower picture is a more recent picture of a chapter sponsored youth pollinator habitat project. So and those are the things that we do, and we do that through providing technical assistance and customer service. So, fast forward about 20 years into our organization, and we realized that there was an opportunity to work more closely with more landowners through a partnership with USDA and specifically the Natural Resources Conservation Service. So it was about in 2004, we kicked off a new initiative. It's called the Farm Bill Biologist Program. And what you're looking at there, all those red stars, is a map of where we have field staff. And we went from 4 positions in South Dakota in 2004 to over 150 positions in over 25 states today. And how those positions deliver wildlife habitat is through working closely with private landowners and, again, delivering technical assistance and providing customer service. So what those Farm Bill biologists saw as they were working with their customers to, help them with problem areas on their properties, kind of saw a recurring theme that there were a lot of issues in existing cropland. I got just a few pictures there. You can see whether it be ponding in a floodplain or ponding in the prairie pothole, poor crop performance along a timbered edge, kind of irregular shaped fields, which result in overlapping inputs, which is really hurts your revenue, or it's a dry, gravelly area in part of a field. So we had lots of customers that were approaching us about alternatives and solutions to help them with these parts of their cropland. Around that same time, we actually had some customers that would bring in what you're looking at there is a yield map. And I'm sure everybody's familiar with what a yield map is. But what you're basically looking at, the green represents a higher number of bushels coming off that field. Inversely, red showing where there's a lack or lower a number of bushels coming off the field. So it shows you spatially across the field how your crop delivered the yield. So, and I'm still moving forward in time here. 5-6 years ago, there was some neat stuff that started to happen as far as the ag technology and some of the software platforms that were available. And some of those tools were advancing yield maps. Yield maps have been around for a long time. But what they actually were starting to do is to couple yield maps, so production data, with a crop budget, an as-applied crop budget. And what that did, that moves you from a yield, and so understanding just how many bushels came off of every part of the field, to understanding the dollars that were input in that part of a field, as well as the output in grain revenue on that same part of the field. So you could actually produce a profitability map. And so what you're looking at on the right there, green is still good, just like a yield map, and red is what you don't want to see, but that's actually representing dollars and cents instead of bushels. So for example, if you look on that far right map, in this really dark area, that's actually a loss of around $600 an acre in that particular year. And what we became excited about is that with this technology, it would help us help our customers to really laser focus some of our conservation alternatives to these poor parts of the field, the parts of the field that just aren't carrying their weight. Another function of some of the software around that time was actually able to take an existing data set. So look at some of those profitability maps, look backwards in time, and actually play out some hypothetical scenarios. So in this example that you're looking at right here, it was the same yield map as before. You can see that in the northwest corner of this field along the west property line, there's a couple of wetland basins that are kind of habitual offenders, if you will. So they pretty regularly drown out and don't produce the crop that the rest of the field does. So what we're able to do with the software is actually draw in a hypothetical scenario. In this case, it was a conservation reserve program is what we looked at. And you can see in squaring off that 11 acres, roughly 11 acres part of the field, as you look at those tables on the bottom, you can see that we're increasing the average yield of the rest of the field. We're increasing the profit across the rest of the field. And then we're improving the ROI, so the return on the investment. So that was something we got pretty excited about, because instead of just kind of making statements like conservation program could potentially improve your bottom line, we were able to go into and use a customer's data to help prove out that a conservation alternative was the more financially attractive option. So just kind of continuing that, as we worked to the project, this one is an example. As you look at that map, one of the challenges for us was trying to define where exactly the edge of that, that project should be, following the philosophy of farm the best and conserve the rest. So it was always a little bit of a guessing game before that. We could use aerial photos and other things to help us, but with yield, precision ag and precision conservation tools, we actually are able to not just guess anymore. So as you think about on the right side of that, those small little runty ears of corn, that's closer to the problem area. And as you move farther away, you get back into much higher producing cropland. With with these technologies and understanding input, relative to output, we can know to the foot exactly where that profitability line is, and that helps us provide that information to our customers, so they can continue to farm those acres that have a history of being productive, and look into alternatives on those acres that are lagging behind. So when we do that too, when we're looking at removing those parts of the field, I like to kind of compare it to the metaphor of trimming the fat on a nice big fat ribeye, right? So, or trimming the gristle, I guess, if you will. So as we remove those parts from the whole, we're actually improving the profitability on the cropland that stays in production. We're improving the return on investment. Over time, we can actually improve the actual production history on that field, and that increases the number of bushels that can be protected under crop insurance, which is significant. And then farmability is a made-up word that I love to use. In this case, it applies to that this farmer not having to fight that low muddy area down in the southeast corner of that field. So we're making the rest of the farm easier to farm. And then, at the exact same time, what we're doing is we're minimizing, reducing the risk, because those areas are prone to flooding. And at the same time, we're wasting wasted capital. We're decreasing wasted capital. And as our production cost goes down and our yield comes up, we're actually lowering our break-even profit point for the rest of the field. And then, of course, as I think most of us can imagine, as we look at those marginal acres and converting those into a perennial cover type, like Conservation Reserve Program with native warm season grasses and forbs, we're delivering tremendous value for water quality, water quantity, soil health, and of course, wildlife habitat. So I just kind of set the stage there. That was really I'd say the origin story for Pheasants Forever. Pheasants Forever kind of kicking off their precision conservation initiative. So it started in Iowa in 2015, and we've now expanded to all those states you see there with the yellow stars. I think just last week we added created another position in Ohio. So this is growing, and it's kind of an exciting thing to see. And it's still built along that same principle of delivering habitat through providing technical assistance, in this case, profitability, data analysis, and information about conservation programs. So here's our precision vision to demonstrate through the use of technology and collaboration, farmers will increase their profitability while also providing benefits for soil health, water quality, and wildlife habitat. So that's kind of our guiding principle. And I'm going to just queue up a video here, just because I think this video did a really great job of capturing some of the work that we're attempting to do with growers. And you guys might even recognize the gentleman in this video here. So hopefully this audio works. Give me a thumbs up.
Iowa is really unique. We're the most manipulated landscape of any state in the U.S. We're one of the most productive landscapes in the U.S. It's provided an opportunity for rural communities to be sustained for generations and for the state as a whole to capitalize on the resources that we have. And it's important for us to preserve that. I experienced one of the worst droughts that we've seen in 2012, and then a couple really wet and heavy rainfall experiences in 2013 and 2014. And so I look at my experience with that early on in my farming career, and that informed me to build a resilient farming operation. To be a resilient farm, we need to be profitable, but we need to take care of these natural spaces with wildlife and the abundance and diversity that comes with those. Is it possible to find a balance of, the economics to the natural spaces and that trade-off? I definitely think it is. A lot of these spaces that we use on our farm that are less profitable, we can sometimes remove from production, and we can be saving money per acre on those inputs, maintaining our yield, and then diversifying the space that we have. We're improving economically for us. We're also protecting a resource that's utilized by others.
For generations, you didn't exactly know how many bushels or where the bushels came from the field. It was just X number of bushels across the whole field. And now that we have precision ag technology, we can go right to those spots and identify those areas that are losing the farmer money. We can see exactly where those problem areas are and start to apply some solutions. The Soil Health and Habitat Program is going to help farmers get a little better understanding of their operation, and then provide them some options that are more flexible than some traditional conservation programs out there. You're eliminating and lowering your risk, improving the overall performance of the rest of the field, but we're also providing an opportunity for some high-quality habitat in that same operation. It just takes a plan, a will, some good information, and it's amazing what you can do with a little bit of change.
Our name's been on this deed for a short amount of time, but these species have been here on this landscape for a long, long time, and the land belongs more to them than it does to us. We're just here for a short while, and it's our responsibility to care for what we've been entrusted. We can have both. We can grow feed for livestock, and we can also have a habitat for those species. It's really productive, it's really ecologically diverse, and it's worth investing our time and resources to get that habitat back. It's a humbling privilege to be able to care for a resource as unique and just incredible as this one is.
Okay. Yeah, that video was too good not to share with you guys. So shout out to Purina and then Bigfoot Media and Nathan Anderson for that matter, in helping us kind of tell a little bit of that story, and excited to continue working with Nathan there. But I think that kind of gives the sense of what we see as the opportunity, and that these marginal underperforming parts of the field are make for perfect wildlife habitat. So I think it's just a great example of how conservation and agriculture can be complementary to each other, which sometimes isn't always seen that way. So one of the things we saw very quickly once we started working more in this space, more focused on working with farmers and precision ag data, was that we just had this tremendous amount of partner interest, which is pretty exciting. So that was from partners that we'd already been working with who wanted to work with us more and in new ways. And just as exciting as that is, it opened a whole bunch of doors for us that, we probably wouldn't have. We had conversations with folks we wouldn't have otherwise. So as you look up there, you can see some pretty significant agricultural companies up there, and there's a lot of overlap in providing farmer value and delivering conservation outputs on through this idea. So I don't have a ton of time here, so I'm going to move through again the process with an actual example here, and hopefully get to the end with some questions from you guys. So this whole concept, I guess, is something that we affectionately call turning red acres green. So finding those unprofitable parts of the field and then investigating more profitable solutions that can deliver conservation benefits. So before I forget, I just want to mention that my position is made possible through USDA, NRCS, and then the services that I provide, along with all my other folks that do the same work as I do for Pheasants Forever, the service is completely free. There is no cost incurred from working with us or using your data or understanding your options. So jumping into it. The first step I would say is probably one of my favorite, just because it's fun to get to know folks. So obviously getting to know that farmer, getting out on that farm, understanding what their operation looks like, what their rotations are, what conservation practices they've done in the past, what areas they think are the lowest hanging fruit for investigating some of the solutions. This is, again, a pleasure. That's a fun part of the job. It looked a little different this last year in doing some of those through Zoom meetings instead of sitting across the kitchen table, but it was still, it's still a fun way to do it. So once we've started to work with someone and we know that they want to move ahead with going through this analysis, the next step is going to be kind of bringing all the data together. So that's going to be a lot of different types of geospatial information. That's going to be the precision ag part of things. Most importantly under that is we're after the crop yields, because we can't really understand profitability unless we can be able to quantify the output within a field. The other information that we need to bring to the table is going to be the inputs. So that's going to be what's the cost of production, including things like land cost or cash rent cost. We, again, just like we need the output, we need the input to arrive at a profitability. So actually connecting to the precision data used to be more complicated. Involved lots of chasing folks around with a USB flash drive. Now, thankfully, there's some really neat tools. Some of the software tools we use can connect us to the data just with a couple button clicks. So this is just a screenshot here out of the John Deere Operations Center. Like I said, some of these tools have the ability to share certain bits of data with trusted partners and advisors. And that's what some of my folks have done. And again, it's a really painless way to share some data. So again, moving into this a little further into this example. So at this point, I've got the data, I've got the budget, and what we've calculated is what the actual break-even yield is in this particular year. So we're looking at 2018 data, and this is soybeans in 2018, and the break-even yield for this grower in this year was 55 bushels. So in the John Deere Operations Center, I've redone the legend in this map to show yellow is break-even and green is the parts of the field that are delivering a profit above the break-even, and the red below is below that. So those parts of the field are revenue negative. And in case you're wondering what's worse than red, would be nothing. So if you look down in this bottom left, the southwest corner of that field, the fact that part of the map isn't colored in shows that there wasn't even a crop to harvest out there. So obviously that's going to be a problem. We never want to just look at like 1 year of data, right? So because there's so much variability year to year to year, the more data that we can bring into the analysis helps to clarify the picture. So in looking at a couple years of data for this grower, 2019, we went through the same exercise, determining what that break-even yield was for corn that year, and it was 191 bushels. So I created the legend in the same fashion. So the green is revenue positive and red is revenue negative. But again, as you look in the southwest corner there, you can see just kind of a gaping hole. And this that part of the field suffers from kind of frequent ponding. There's a drainage ditch right there that blows out on the regular. Again, so that's focusing us in on that part of the field. Some of the tools, again, I just touched on this, but the power of multiple years of data. This tool actually, John Deere Operations Center, can actually aggregate multiple years of data. So this is looking at a soybean average performance over that 5-year span. And you can just see as that map is color shaded, there's much more red, much more dark red down in that same part of the field that we know has seen some ponding. So that is probably no surprise, but it certainly helps to use data to kind of identify the boundaries for the area. So then we start to really focus in on the problem area. And with that tool, you can actually take a closer look at the problem part of the field and show how it performed relative to the rest of the field. So as you guys can maybe not see that whole part of the field, which is 23.5 acres, produced 283 bushels in total. So obviously it's lagging behind. 12 bushels is not going to pay the bills here. And in that case, that's, that area in that year, in this particular year, was a loss of about $16,000 in wasted inputs. So before I forget, I just wanted to make sure it's clear that in that example, it's a John Deere Operations Center, but we're pretty proud to be non-denominational, I guess, if you will, as far as the platforms we use and the data we look at. So we are happy to work with anyone that wants to work with us in whatever platform or data type that they are currently collecting. So here's actually an example, just another example there. This is an analysis that I just did yesterday afternoon for a customer. This is using Ag Leader's SMS Advanced tool. And it's actually showing the exact same thing here. I apologize, you guys can't read all those small numbers, but same premise, red is bad, green is good. And that tool at SMS Advanced is letting me do some really neat stuff. So you can actually visualize some of these fields 3D, and you can actually see, it shows you how far down, what the performance is in certain parts of the field on the average. So this is 4 years of data. And as you guys can see in that, there's multiple parts of the field that are, at or below $200 an acre loss. So it really helps you focus in on those parts of the field. But moving back to the original example there, again, without surprise, maybe this customer wanted to fix that 23.5 acres. They were interested in finding an alternative that was more profitable. So that's what we focused in on. So, the next step in the process here is going to be, once we've got, the area that we are looking at, is to investigate any and all kind of alternatives. So, there's a lot of acronyms there. Some of them I'm sure you guys are familiar with, but there's just, the takeaway here is that there's lots of programs, almost always more than the customers were aware of, as I'm finding out. There's just a lot of neat programs delivered through the Farm Bill that folks aren't aware of, whether it be, federal, state, or local programs. And that's one of the things that we specialize in. And a lot of those programs are, site specific or have certain criteria. And that's part of what we do, understanding what the options look like for a very specific spot of the farm. And so all the previous slide showed a bunch of programmatic alternatives. There's also, a lot of ways to turn those red acres green that don't involve a contract or a program. There's some neat things being done with diversifying the crop rotations and incorporating small grains, maybe a lower, a crop that's got a lower cost of production is easy in a way to fix those red acres. We've also worked with folks to maybe take some of their marginal cropland and seed it down to be a part of their livestock operation. So whether that be a pasture or forage production, those are other viable options, and I think pretty neat ones, to be honest. And then, even new ones. I just added that last bullet here, a couple just recently, and that's kind of the fun part of this, is these solutions and tools kind of continue to evolve here. But that actually be there's some programs out there that are starting to look at biomass production for anaerobic digesters for renewable gases. So it's kind of neat how many different alternatives can be investigated. And just shout out there, Iowa Learning Farms is having a webinar on that one specifically coming up. But yeah, I like to think of the work that I do at this part of the process really as kind of just laying out this whole buffet of information about what alternatives could, be taken advantage of to improve the profitability there. So the point being that nothing that that I present as an idea, there's no requirement that anybody that I work with signs up for any particular program. It's really just they can put whatever they want on their plate, once they understand the program. So in this case, this customer, they took that 23.5 acres down in the southwest corner, and they signed up for an NRCS program. It's called the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, and it was a new pothole initiative program. So they were interested in that because it was a shorter term contract than, say, the Conservation Reserve Program. That program they went with only had a 5-year contract. So again, that met their objectives, and so that's what we went ahead with. And in applying that solution, relative to that last corn year, if they would have had this solution in place, it would have improved their ROI by 20%, which is pretty significant. So again, I touched on this earlier in the presentation, but for them, these guys were interested in this alternative because it delivered higher profits for them across the whole field. It's going to move their APH, their actual production history, up. They're not going to have to fight the getting tractors stuck in the mud down in the southwest corner. And again, they're reducing some of the negatives associated with previously farming that. Now, another fun part here, I'd say, is the ability to validate something after the fact. So here's that yield map that I showed earlier. And so I worked with this gentleman. These were the problem areas that were present. So he enrolled in the Conservation Reserve Program, just 11 acres in the corner of this field. So again, this is a project that has already been installed, but it's still fun to bring the data in and take a look at it and see how this farm is performing after the solution has been applied. As you can see there with the aerial photo, almost the entire problem basins were encapsulated with this program enrollment. And here's a yield map from 2017. So this was the first corn year after this practice was installed. And as you can see, it looks a lot different than it did the earlier yield map did. Very little red out here. 2017 was a good growing year, but it still would have had that west part of the field still would have had a yield drag relative to the rest. So this grower actually had their highest ever yield or corn yield after applying the solution. They were north of 250 bushels to the acre. Very, very pleased with it. What I think was even more exciting was that in 2019, when it was corn again, we all know how wet 2019 was. It was a terrible year, at least up in northern Iowa. This is the yield map from that year. And again, you don't have to use much imagination to know that northwest corner of the field would have been bright red again in those basins, would have been a drown out. But that wasn't the case. And because we trimmed, the gristle off of this field delivered its second highest ever corn yield, about 245, I believe, in a year that was terribly wet. So again, it's fun to go back and validate that management change had a significant impact on how that field is performing. And then there's a drone shot, and you can see in that wet year, those basins were full. Just like they would have been if that was crop out there, that would have been lost crop. But instead, because it's enrolled in a program, it's getting that annual payment year after year, regardless if it's wet or dry. And this grower, signed up for this practice because of the financial benefits, getting rid of those marginal acres and finding a more profitable alternative. But I guess the farm kid turned wildlife biologist in me, I really love this, as an example, because as you look at that image on the left, it's like, yes, that cover was done for financial reasons, but it doesn't, you can look at that and just about hear the birds singing and the insects buzzing. So that type of habitat on the landscape is incredibly valuable for, you know, game and non-game species. And you just can't miss an opportunity to get a picture of your dogs in a presentation. So it's, you know, those types of habitat, even if they are little and scattered across the landscape, also are incredibly valuable to upland game birds like our namesake pheasants, and then give guys like me an opportunity to get out and pursue them in the fall. So here's a testimonial from one of our customers. I'll give you guys a minute to read this. Because it means a lot more coming from one of our farmer customers than it does from me saying it to you. But yeah, that brings me to an end, and I'm maybe over a little bit time or close to, but I'd be happy to take any questions that you guys have directed towards Jorgen.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. I think you're right on time. So perfect. We do have a few questions in the chat. I'm going to work my way through these. Feel free to keep typing your questions into the chat there. So Ronald has a question, and I'm going to ask his question, and then I'll maybe add on one of my own that's kind of related. So Ronald asked, what percentage of farmers have this data, and why don't they use it themselves? What can you do to help if they don't have the data? And I'm going to expand that specifically to technology too, Josh. Do you need a lot of new technology to do this, or do you find that most farmers have this technology and have this data already, even if they don't use it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'd say in Iowa specifically, more growers than not do have at least limited yield data potential. And yeah, I guess the follow up to that was, why aren't they using it? That is a great question. It seemed like in my line of work now and before, as you would have a conversation with folks, there's a lot of yield maps that that data is captured. An image, a map is created and printed, and it's maybe looked at once, and it goes into a file cabinet, which is really unfortunate because that there's a cost associated with having the equipment to produce that image. So yeah, as far as it's a missed opportunity to not put that data to work, because in this application, it's pretty easy to see that especially if you've been collecting data for multiple years, that data can cut through pretty quick and paint a picture that it's hard to see. So I wish more guys used it. That's why we're out here trying to continually promote this idea of putting your data to work for that exact purpose. And so as far as folks that maybe don't have the yield data, there are some, there's other types of data that we can pull in that can help fill in some of the gaps there as far as knowledge and performance. I mean, we can look at elevation maps, we can look at aerial photos, we can, I think some publicly available data that's really exciting is NDVI, which is like a plant health image. It shows, plant performance, plant stress, and there are some tools that have already taken NDVI imagery and run it through an algorithm that actually can produce a yield estimate with some level of reasonable confidence. So I think looking ahead, I hope to see more move that direction, and that could be a really invaluable tool for folks that don't have the hardware to collect data today.
Great, thanks, Josh. So Sam has a question here. Some landowners seem only to be concerned about a rent check and aren't really involved in managing the farmland or practices. Do you have advice for approaching absentee landowners on my rented acres with these ideas? And then maybe after you answer that, Josh, you can talk about if you work with landowners directly who maybe are a little bit more involved and how they have those conversations with their tenants. So kind of two sides there of that coin.
Yeah, the landowner tenant kind of relationship is pretty dynamic, and there's slightly different objectives on each depending on what side of that you're on. But I have had some luck with landowners and tenants that have a good relationship that are interested in both coming out ahead in this scenario. So I've worked with a tenant. I'll give this example. I worked with a tenant who was interested in removing some of the problematic parts of that field. And the reason they were doing that is, they were expected to continue to pay a certain level of cash rent. But that tenant knew that it wasn't cutting it on those more marginal parts of the field. So we pulled the data, his yield data in, his crop budget in, and produced a profitability map for him. And then we actually investigated a couple of different enrollment scenarios, and he presented those to the landowner. So that was this output, I guess, was a tool for him to have a conversation with the tenant about how to meet in the middle on both of them, making money, long story short. So in that scenario, he actually increased his cash rent. His bid was to increase his cash rent by $25 an acre on the remaining tillable acres. And knowing that he could do that, when we proved that out with the data, that he could still improve his ROI on the acres that were still in production by paying more because they were better acres. There was less wasted capital. And in that case, we also, again, brought that conservation alternative to the table, and it actually was very close to a wash. So whatever lost income that landowner would have realized from not having it cash rented, there was, in that instance, it was a CRP payment that it wasn't as high as cash rent, but it was less acres. And when you took the higher cash rent on the tillable acres relative to the CRP, the landowner actually came out a little bit ahead. So I would say that the landowner tenant dynamic is probably one of the most significant challenges we have in Iowa for getting conservation on the landscape, just because of, and I can't remember exactly what percent of Iowa cropland acres are rented, but it's more than not. So it's a challenge there. And frankly, I think there just needs to be kind of a transparent conversation. And I think bringing the data to the table can help with that, because then you can literally see the loss, the earnings, and kind of start a conversation around that.
Yeah. About 55% of farmland in Iowa is rented. So
yeah,
more than half. Yeah, sounds like the data can be a tool to use, but I assume that's where you come into, is kind of to help translate that data both for the farmer and the landowner, and kind of what that means on the ground. Because I think that communication barrier is where things get lost sometimes.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think in some cash rent agreements, they require sharing something like a yield map. But I think as a landowner talks to a tenant about their farm, I think the number that resonates maybe is the cash, or not, sorry, excuse me, the yield on the high end, and that's what they grab onto. And I think one thing that people forget is that you can still have a crop field, a cornfield that produces 240 bushel corn, and you can still be unprofitable. So I mean, it's yield doesn't always correlate, revenue positive acres because of a higher level of cost on that land. So the profitability maps, I think, can show a little bit more of what's going on.
Great. I have a question from Jessica here. Josh, in your experience, have you seen a pattern in the number of years of profitability monitoring that push a farmer operator over the edge to act on a red zone? So how, I guess, how much data, what becomes
How many years of red do they need to see before they
right?
decide to change? So in that example that I showed down in the southwest corner of the field, that those operators only harvested 100% of that field once in a 5-year span. So it's going to take more than 1 or 2 years. And again, and I think that's the value of having stacked years of data, because the more years you have, the more irrefutable it is that that those areas are not carrying their weight. But I'd say, I get nervous about making recommendations if I'm only looking at 1 or 2 years. I think 3 or 4 years, and especially if those 3 or 4 years are kind of representative of kind of across the spectrum of weather. If we look back, 2020 was drought, borderline drought, depending on where you were in the state. 19 and 18 were incredibly wet, and 17 was, kind of a dreamy, production year. So we've got some variability there, and I think that kind of helps set a better average across all those.
Vicky has a question, but it looks like Vicky's having some technical trouble, so I'm going to hold on to her question. And then, Vicky, when you rejoin us, type in the chat, and I'll try and articulate your question. John had a question: is this program an offshoot of or similar to Profit Zone Manager?
Sure. Profit Zone Manager, isn't really an initiative. That was actually an early software tool. So when Pheasants Forever kicked off our initiative in Iowa, it was in direct partnership with Ag Solver's Profit Zone Manager. So that was one of the financial analysis tools that we used pretty heavily. We've learned since then that it, instead of trying to go through the effort of getting data and people into that particular tool, that it was more valuable to us to meet the growers where they were at with whatever tools they were using. So Profit Zone Manager is still a tool that I have and I use, and it's a great tool for those folks that want to get way down into the weeds and then, look at those kind of hypothetical side-by-side scenarios. But again, like a couple examples I had, we're using all kinds of software and tools, and it seems like that is continuing to grow as more of those tools become available.
Great. Ruth has a question, kind of going back to our landowner tenant conversation. Ruth asked, do you need to work with both landowner and tenant together, or can you do an eval, especially maybe an initial evaluation, just with the landowner, or I will ask just with the tenant, right?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've done kind of all three, whether it be an in tandem and then one, landowner and the tenant, or just the tenant. I can tell you from the landowner perspective that, you want to be so precision ag data, there's like a big privacy thing, right? And about who owns the data, and you have to be very sensitive to that. I think the conversation is going to go sideways in a hurry if you, demand to the tenant that you want all their precision data, to produce a profitability map. I mean, that's kind of like, sneaking a look in their checkbook a little bit. So there's some things that can be done, in looking at soils and NDVI, and maybe getting a sense of what productivity looks like across that field. And I think, and it kind of how you frame up the conversation, right? So I think if the conversation is going to revolve around the landowner, has an interest in trimming off maybe the worst parts of the field for the benefit of the tenant, I think that, that kind of helps that conversation go the right direction. But frankly, I still think it's a benefit to the tenant to bring the data to the table if they know that there's going to be, they have a customer, or a landowner that's wanting to look at program enrollment, because it's in their best interest to direct that enrollment on those red acres. You know, they aren't interested in losing parts of the field that are, you know, have a demonstrated history of being profitable. So I think that is definitely that can make that be a more successful conversation.
Yeah, for sure. So Nathan of video fame here has a question. Farmers use these yield maps to make decisions about different applied fertility levels and installing drainage tiles. In addition to Pheasants Forever, where can I find a good comprehensive resource of other conservation ideas and programs? So,
Sure. Yeah, great question. So there's only one of me, right, across the whole state of Iowa. And as I alluded to, there are lots and lots of programs available, you know, enough to make your head spin there. But yeah, other resources that are available, absolutely go to your USDA local service center. There's one in every single county. You can get connected with the Natural Resources Conservation Service and the Farm Service Agency. And between those two, they administer, you know, I'd say the bulk share of most of the conservation programs in the state. So great resources for information and technical assistance there. And then, you know, I talked about the Farm Bill Biologist program earlier. So we've got 10 Farm Bill biologists in the state of Iowa that cover, you know, 4 counties. So we've got pretty good representation in Iowa as far as assistance with understanding what your programs are. We've also got the DNR. They have their private lands staff, as well as the conservation districts of Iowa, who have some wildlife specialists. So we're fortunate to have a lot of resources available for landowners in the state of Iowa, you know, to all help them kind of navigate, you know, all these different programs and eligibility requirements and stuff. So, and it's, all those things are free. You know, those are all partnership positions, and you know, all those positions are providing information to landowners and helping them, again, cut through some of the misunderstanding that's associated with some of those programs at times. Mm-hmm. So that's a great question, Nathan. Thank you.
So Ruth has a couple follow-ups. One of her follow-ups is, what if the landowner already has yield maps? And it sounds like, you know, if the landowner has some data, that might make that initial conversation a little more productive, but still maybe good to treat that as a joint approach from landowner and tenant. Seems to have the best results.
Right. Yeah, I think so. And then, I mean, I'll just also offer to Ruth or anyone else that be happy to reach out to me, you know, after this. And, you know, I'd be more than happy to, you know, take a look at that data if it's available, and you know, kind of start to build a strategy around having a conversation about that. But yeah, I mean, it's having the data in hand is a great start, you know. And as you look at a yield map, and if you're seeing an area that is red, you know, pretty consistently, it's like, well, let's talk about this part of the field. Is there something that, you know, I can do or we can do that's delivers mutual benefit? And that's, again, getting rid of some of those acres that are costing that grower money, and maybe there's an interest from the landowner side, you know, to get some wildlife habitat out there. And it's a great way to do it.
Yeah. So I did paste your email and phone number from your slide, Josh, into the chat. So for attendees, you can find that information in the chat. And then you should also feel free to message Josh over the platform too. So you can answer some messages that way if you want to reach out. I haven't seen that Vicky rejoined us in the chat, but I'm going to ask her question because I think it's a good one. It sounds like that she has some land coming out of CRP, and they're going to put it into some sort of clover or hay, but they want to keep, you know, some of that field, probably, you know, the least productive or the most problematic part of that field in CRP. So that's kind of working backwards, right?
Yep.
And I don't know if you have any advice on that.
Yeah, I've done some of that before, you know, and for any number of reasons, whether a program isn't, you know, the same program that was initially rolled has changed, and, you know, you've got to reduce the size of that contract contract or for any other reasons you want to bring some back into production, there are some of those data sets that you can take a look at that can kind of help you inform what parts of the field are maybe the most sensitive. So you can look at like LiDAR elevation maps is a great one. You can look at soil type. That there's a whole bunch of information based on soil type, and soil type is the most significant variable within a crop field, that influences productivity anyway. So you can look at those soil maps, and you could look at NDVI just to see if that CRP, that plant staying out there, had experienced any stress. Aerial images are great to spot things like ponding, things of that nature. So I've worked with folks to go backwards, like you said, where it's using some technology to kind of draw the framework of what should still be enrolled in a program, and if there's areas that are maybe less sensitive that could be sustainably farmed, and then pulling those acres out. So it works both ways.
Well, with that, we are about 1 minute from the end of the hour. So I would just want to thank Josh again for sharing with us. I want to thank everyone for attending this session. A recording of this session will be posted to this page in probably the next couple hours sometime. So throughout the conference, I encourage you to visit the message boards, meet with other attendees and exhibitors. You can always revisit this chat, message Josh, and make sure you join us tonight for happy hour and then the premiere of our Livestock on the Land documentary. So I will see everybody around.
Perfect. I should say, Jorgen, we are currently in a general CRP sign-up period through February 12th, and continuous CRP is open. So I meant to say that earlier. Great. It's a great time to look at, options under CRP. So.
Yeah, I will try and put some information into the chat about that.
Perfect. Well, thanks a lot.
Yep. Thanks, Josh.